Hello, everyone. Welcome into Above My Pay Grade. My name is Eric. Thank you for tuning in. I would like to apologize for my video yesterday. Um, the YouTube uh, powers that be took it down, so there's some misinformation involved, and I wanted to make it very clear. I trust everything the World Health Organization says. There's nothing they've ever said or done that I distrust. And if I gave you guys the impression that somehow these people could be corrupted, potentially bought off, or spread any kind of information that isn't true, I apologize. That was not my intent. One of my favorite World Health Organization recommendations, back in 2015, they said that sugary drinks were the number one leading cause of childhood obesity. And that made sense, but Coca-Cola didn't like that, so they lobbied for them to take that down, seeing as how they have sugary drinks. And then the World Health Organization changed their mind. It's not the leading cause of childhood obesity. And so, it was a little confusing for me because at first I was like, okay, do I give my kids Coke or not? But so once they finally figured it out, I've been mainlining Coca-Cola into my kids' veins ever since. And no consequences. Yes, they've gained a little weight, but seems pretty healthy to me. At least that's what the World Health Organization says. So, lastly, again, apologies if I led anyone to believe that there's any kind of other side to the story. All right. So, um, so that being said, today's story: what is a debt spiral, and are we in one? I follow a guy on Substack named James Lavish. He's a Bitcoin guy. He does a good job laying it out in layman's terms. Again, most people don't want to hear this or hear the truth, but if you have somebody who's interested in potentially how much debt is too much debt, how do we keep printing money and there's no day of reckoning? Um, there is a day of reckoning. And I think it's obviously it's getting closer every day. But the question is, what are the consequences going to be, and are we already in a debt spiral? So let's take a look at this story here from the Substack, and I will again link it in the description below. Okay. So he says, before we get into any specifics, let's first walk through the basics of how government operates financially and why it's extraordinarily complex beast of operations. It can be boiled down to pretty simple parts that mirrors a typical company. I've said this before. Um, income and outflow. The only difference is they can take on debt by printing it, um, where a company has to take on debt by borrowing it, therefore taking purchasing power from somewhere else. The government creates purchasing power, where a business has to take it from somewhere else, so they're borrowing it, right? Um, and I think one of the biggest bubbles, and I've said this before, like the biggest question in the economy is the Fed telling the truth? One of the biggest bubbles uh, in that vein is credibility. Like how tenuous our economy is because it's wholly reliant on people trusting, right? And if that trust goes away, which what would be a reason it would go away? The system stops working as it was intended. Rich get richer, poor get poorer, and in an effort to put band-aids on it, the government prints money. Therefore, uh, they cause more inflation, make the problem worse. So, further reading here. Note that this is different from the debt the Fed, central bank, has on its balance sheet because of quantitative easing. So they don't take into account. See, we have our national debt, and then the Fed. Last I checked, had about $9 trillion on their balance sheet, but that's not counted in our national debt. So that's basically debt that the government has issued that is then bought back from investors and now holds itself. So the Fed has a lot of money on its balance sheet. So you say, so what? About 95% of U.S. government revenues come in the form of simple taxes, individual, corporate income tax, yada, yada. You guys know the deal. So I've laid this out before. The federal budget, here's our income, here's our expenses. And what's different now? We have inflation and we have $31 trillion in debt. So here's the point of the article. What is a debt spiral? If the government is operating in a deficit, which we do, it can either cut expenses, and he actually says, "Ha," which I agree with. Who wants to cut expenses? We will vote for it until it causes pain. Unfortunately, it can generate more income by stimulating GDP. Think war or raising taxes. Problem is, cutting expenses cost votes. War can lead to future productivity damage and or losses, especially in the counterattack at home. War is not productive. I know that's a cosmic idea for a lot of politicians, but it's not productive. It's destructive. Uh, Higher taxes can weigh on companies and hurt their ability to grow, in turn, and in turn hurt the country's GDP, which leads to lower tax revenue. So option A is bad, option B is bad, option C is bad. So what's the only option that's politically palatable? You're right, or that's right. It's printing money. You guessed it. Printing money. So let's take a look at this diagram, which I think is kind of interesting. So we're here. We have rising debts, rising cost of borrowing. We're there because we have inflation. The Fed's raising interest rates. Who wants to loan the government money if it's going to be below the rate of inflation? So when the government refinances its debts, yeah, okay. So rising cost of borrowing, spending cuts or tax increases, slowing economic growth, and then the cycle repeats, which means they have to their debt goes up again. Because their debt to GDP is going up, people don't want to lend them more money. So rising cost of borrowing goes up again, and then people get angry and they start doing spending cuts. You see how this goes. So what's the situation in the U.S.? We can see here the current running total of the U.S. federal debt is about 30.7 trillion, and the U.S. GDP is about 24.8, including all federal, state, and local debt. The current debt to GDP ratio is 1.37 or 137%. Not great at first glance. So why is this insurmountable? Is because last year we took in a record number of taxes. That was a tax bubble. Why did we take in a record number of taxes? Anyone guess? It was because the stock market went through the roof. And is that happening this year? No. Right. So obviously they're going to lose. Last I checked, about 600 billion in tax revenue. So last year we took in 4.8 trillion in taxes. We had 3.7 in entitlement, 3.7 trillion in entitlements, which is just laughable to me. That you have your average person who's like, we need all these government programs, and I'm like, we spend more on medicine in this country than Canada or England per person. So this isn't just for the population, but per person, we spend more on medicine in this country from the government, and we don't even have universal health care. So there's obviously a problem there. Anyways, so that leaves 300 billion left over for interest expense. Problem is the U.S. is currently running a tab of 400 billion on interest annually. So I can keep beating this drum. And even the CBO is saying, hey, look, it looks pretty bad. The question is, what does the day of reckoning look like? And this is one of my predictions in 2023. I don't think we can get out of this. Um, like a lot of people think we're going to get back down to 2% inflation. And fair enough. Let's say we have 2% inflation. What did the Fed have to do to the economy to get us there? And then what will they do in perpetuity because because they've kind of ruined the economy? So in other words, they get us down to 2% by raising interest rates, having people lose their jobs, yada yada. So spending power goes down. Great. That means economic crash, recession, depression. Then the Fed has to step in because it's really politically unpalatable to have a recession, depression, more money printing, more quantitative easing, yada yada. And this is where the bubble comes in. What is going to happen when banks around the world, countries around the world, lose faith in the Fed? Because they still trust them for some reason. I don't know why, but they do. So that's one of the biggest bubbles, in my opinion. Is there are people in the United States on a micro level that trust this dollar system, mainly because of they don't understand what's going on. So they trust that everything's going to be okay. The government will figure it out. But it will take pain for them to realize, unfortunately, economic pain for them to realize that they don't control this anymore. It's out of their hands. We have debt, inflation, and the servicing cost is out of control. We're in a debt spiral. And you who are listening to this are kind of lucky because you're actually paying attention. And it's not the masses start paying attention once it's too late to protect yourself. Because the call to action here in his article is buy things the government can't print: gold, silver, Bitcoin. Some might even say real estate. Um, I wouldn't say that right now, but gold, silver, Bitcoin. And when your average citizen realizes they should be buying that, that's when it skyrockets. All right, guys, let me know what you think of that article. And again, I want to apologize if I left any doubt about the credibility of the World Health Organization. They are fabulous and they've never lied. Okay. All right. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.